Starbucks did not become famous because it sold the cheapest coffee. It became famous because it sold a feeling, a warm room, a name on a cup, a place between home and work, a tiny daily ritual that made a $5 coffee feel normal. But then, something strange happened. The company that built its empire on slowing people down became obsessed with speeding everything up. Mobile orders, drive-thrus, custom drinks, promotions, wait times, staffing pressure, more complexity. And suddenly, Starbucks had a very uncomfortable problem. It was still selling coffee, but for many customers, it no longer felt like Starbucks. This is not a simple story about expensive lattes. This is a story about what happens when a brand optimizes the transaction and slowly damages the experience that made people care in the first place. Let's be clear, Starbucks is not dead. This is still one of the most recognizable consumer brands in the world. It has thousands of stores, a powerful loyalty program, massive digital reach, and a brand that most restaurant chains would love to have. But that is exactly why the story matters. Small brands can lose customers because nobody knows them. Starbucks had the opposite problem. Everybody knew Starbucks. The question became, did people still want what Starbucks had become? In fiscal Q4 2024, Starbucks reported a 7% decline in global comparable store sales. U.S. comparable sales fell 6%, driven by a 10% decline in comparable transactions. China comparable sales fell 14%. Starbucks also admitted that more promotions and app activity did not improve customer behavior. That is a very important detail because it suggests the problem was not just marketing, it was not just price, it was not just one bad product launch. Something deeper in the customer experience was broken. To understand the problem, you have to understand what Starbucks originally sold. Yes, coffee was the product, but the brand promise was bigger than coffee. Starbucks popularized the idea of the coffeehouse as a third place, not home, not work, but somewhere in between, a place for comfort, connection, routine, and community. That was the magic. Customers were not only buying caffeine, they were buying a little moment of control in the middle of the day, a place where you could sit, a barista who might know your order, a brand that made an ordinary habit feel premium. And from a business perspective, that was brilliant. Because once a product becomes part of your routine, the company is not just competing on price, it is competing on habit. That is why Starbucks could charge more than gas station coffee, convenience store coffee, and sometimes even local coffee shops. Starbucks was not just a drink, it was a ritual. But rituals are fragile. They are easy to monetize, and then easy to over-optimize. Over time, Starbucks became more than a coffeehouse. It became a mobile ordering platform, a drive-thru operation, a cold beverage customization engine, a loyalty app, a promotional machine, a real estate network, a labor scheduling puzzle. And each of those things made sense individually. Mobile ordering is convenient, drive-thrus add volume, customization increases ticket size, promotions drive app engagement. But together, they changed the store. The barista was no longer just making coffee for the person in front of them. They were feeding a queue that might include cafe orders, drive-thru orders, mobile orders, delivery orders, heavily customized drinks, and customers standing there wondering why nobody is calling their name. That is the corporate truth moment. A company can add convenience until the experience becomes less convenient. Because the customer does not care how sophisticated the system is, they care how the system feels. Mobile ordering should have been a pure win, and in many ways it was. It increased digital engagement, captured demand, and made ordering easier, but it also created a queue that customers could not see. When you walk into a Starbucks and there are only 3 people in line, but your drink still takes 12 minutes, you do not think, what an impressive omni-channel demand engine. You think, this place is broken. That is the mobile order paradox. The app makes Starbucks easier to use before you arrive, but if the store cannot process the demand smoothly, the app makes Starbucks feel worse once you're there. At its 2026 Investor Day, Starbucks said it had achieved less than 4-minute service times in cafe and drive-thru during peak across the portfolio in Q1, and that mobile orders were accurate and on time. That tells you something. If the turnaround has to focus on bringing order to mobile order, then mobile order was not just a feature, it had become an operating challenge. And this is exactly the kind of pattern we study on Corporate Truth. Big companies rarely break because one person has one bad idea. They struggle when every logical decision adds complexity to the system. If you want more videos about how famous companies really work behind the brand image, subscribe to Corporate Truth, because the interesting story is almost never the marketing slogan, it is the machine underneath. Now, Starbucks needed someone to fix the machine. In 2024, Starbucks appointed Brian Niccol as chairman and CEO. Starbucks highlighted his background at Chipotle Mexican Grill, where he focused on people, culture, brand, menu innovation, operational excellence, and digital transformation. Reuters reported that the move sent Starbucks shares up 24% and came at a time when the company faced competition, weaker demand in the US and China, and activist investor pressure. In other words, this was not just a leadership change, it was a signal. Starbucks needed a turnaround operator. The interesting part is that the turnaround was not called Forward to Starbucks. It was called Back to Starbucks. That name tells you the strategy. The company was not saying, we need to become something totally new. It was saying, we need to remember what people came here for. The Back to Starbucks strategy focused on coffeehouse culture, connection, craft, partner support, and operational execution. That is a smart repositioning, because Starbucks did not need to convince people that the brand existed. It needed to convince people that the experience was worth returning to. But there was a cost. In fiscal 2025, Starbucks revenue increased 3% to $37.2 billion, but operating income fell from $5.4 billion in fiscal 2024 to $2.9 billion. Operating margin fell from 15.0% to 7.9%. That is the hard part of turnarounds. The fix is often expensive before it looks brilliant. You have to close stores, invest in labor, simplify operations, rebuild service, and accept that the brand experience may need money before it can produce money again. There is another uncomfortable part of the Starbucks story. You cannot rebuild hospitality with a stressed workforce. Customers experience the brand through the people behind the counter. If those people are rushed, understaffed, overwhelmed, or frustrated, the brand promise breaks at the exact place where the customer touches it. Starbucks Workers Union says the union movement has won elections at nearly 700 Starbucks locations and is still fighting for a fair contract. Its stated demands include staffing, wages, available hours, protections, and health and safety. You do not need to take one side in every labor dispute to understand the business point. A coffeehouse brand depends on partners who can actually create a coffeehouse experience. If the operating model asks employees to be fast, warm, accurate, personal, flexible, and emotionally present while the queue keeps expanding, the customer experience becomes a labor system problem. This is where many executives get the order wrong. They think customer experience is what customers see, but customer experience is often what employees survive. So, is the turnaround working? The answer is, it appears to be gaining momentum, but this is still a multi-year test. In Q4 fiscal 2025, Starbucks reported global comparable store sales growth for the first time in 7 quarters. U.S. comparable sales were flat for the quarter, and September turned positive. Management said the Back to Starbucks strategy was taking hold, while also calling it a multi-year turnaround. Then, in Q2 fiscal 2026, Starbucks reported global comparable store sales up 6.2%, driven by transaction growth, and net revenues up 9% to $9.5 billion. The The company also raised fiscal 2026 guidance. That sounds positive, but the real question is not only whether numbers can recover for a few quarters. The real question is whether Starbucks can rebuild the emotional contract, because the original business model was not simply sell coffee, it was make people feel like Starbucks belongs in their daily life. If customers return because service improves, stores feel better, employees are less overwhelmed, and the ritual feels worth paying for again, then Starbucks has a real turnaround. If customers return only because promotions improved or novelty drinks worked for a quarter, then the deeper problem remains. The Starbucks lesson is bigger than Starbucks. It's a warning to every company that confuses more channels with a better experience. More app features do not automatically mean better service. More customization does not automatically mean more customer love. More promotions do not automatically mean more loyalty. More speed does not automatically mean more convenience. Sometimes the customer experience gets worse because the company keeps adding things that look good in a boardroom. Digital engagement, higher ticket, operational leverage, channel expansion, menu innovation. But at store level, all of that becomes work, and if the work overwhelms the system, the brand starts to feel worse. The corporate truth is simple. A brand is not what the company says it is. A brand is what the customer repeatedly experiences. And at Starbucks, the experience had become too transactional for a brand built on connection. Starbucks lost some of its magic not because people stopped liking coffee. It lost magic because the company became very good at turning coffee into a system, and that system started to damage the feeling that made Starbucks special. The turnaround is interesting because it is not just about drinks, stores, or apps. It is about whether a giant company can simplify itself enough for customers to feel the brand again. Because Starbucks was never only selling coffee, it was selling a place, a routine, a small moment of recognition. And when that disappears, the latte is suddenly just an expensive drink in a long queue. If you want more breakdowns of how famous companies really work beneath the brand image, subscribe to Corporate Truth. This is where we explain the systems behind the slogans.